Basically, the way I work, the way I often work, is that I do site-specific installations. So being from Detroit, living in Detroit, I work with a lot of things I find in Detroit. Detroit has a lot of abandonment, a lot of buildings that were at some point left to the elements, neglected. And since I grew up there, I spent a lot of time exploring these places. And then there's an added element of when you're broke and you don't have any money, abandoned buildings offer free materials. So I spent many years gathering things, making sculptures with things. Then over time, I started to also kind of take photos, and the photos, I didn't think for a long time of myself as a photographer. I didn't go to school for photography, so just kind of slowly became something I thought of as their own projects. And eventually, the idea of making sculptures out of the found objects turned into me wanting to make sculptures right in the places where I'd been gathering the objects. I think I spent a lot of time, it was almost my second home in a lot of these buildings. And I liked being in there so much, and I felt like the work wasn't translating the experience of being in these places. Like taking objects out and making sculptures wasn't necessarily translating the experience of being in the place. So I started to make these site-specific installations with the materials I found on site. And basically, that has become my MO for years now. I come to a place, whether it's Detroit or another city like Indianapolis, and I find what I consider to be an interesting location with materials that I can use, and I try and work and collaborate with that location. So in this case, Chate and our mutual friend Kip Normand suggested a number of buildings for me to come and look at, or not just buildings, but locations, because this doesn't always have to be a building. And it doesn't always have to be an industrial landscape, even though that's what I'm used to. But the first building they showed me was the old RCA plant on Michigan and LaSalle, which, that's interesting to me because of the history, the original history of the building. But what really intrigued me is that its last use was as a recycling center. And when the recycling center left, they left behind a lot of unrecycled material. So there was something ironic about that to me. There's all this wasted material that was supposedly going to be recycled, and instead it's now just abandoned. So that kind of checked off a lot of boxes for me in terms of what I like to do with a project. I like to learn about the history. I like to use wasted material. I like to recycle wasted material. So I spent about the 2 weeks I've been here working with that building, with the materials from that building. I actually came in January when we first did location scouting, and that's when I started to get things back in January. So some of the things you'll see include these awesome anthropomorphic foodstuffs that were part of the RCA building. There was a area where I guess maybe it was a cafeteria or maybe a daycare for kids, I'm not quite sure. But it had lots of things related to kids, including eating your vegetables. So I tried to salvage what I could. In a lot of cases in abandoned buildings, there'll be things like this, which I think are really interesting because they're a part of history and you can see the artist's hand, but there'll also be someone coming along playing paintball or taking a hammer and smashing the hell out of them. So I try to get them before they're all completely gone. Like Chate said, I have a photo series I've been working on for years in Detroit where I document graffiti that I think is unheralded, terrible graffiti. Basically, there's a lot of attention these days on graffiti artists, and I think that the kind of intention of graffiti being a sort of civil disobedience has been somewhat replaced by this commodification of the graffiti artist, and you'll see graffiti artists having museum shows now and selling their work all over, and that's all fine. But what intrigues me is that you'll still find the random drunk guy coming along drawing a penis on top of that beautiful mural graffiti. So trying to document all what I'm calling bad graffiti with the full knowledge of the flexibility of the word bad. How it can actually mean good, you know? So some of the photos in this bad graffiti series that are on this wall are from Indianapolis. So there's I forget if there's, let's see if I can count them. 1, 2, 3, I I think there's 5 or 6 from Indianapolis mixed in. I would love for it to be a game for people to try and pick which ones are Detroit, which ones are Indianapolis. Be pretty impossible. And then the main installation that I've been working on with all the materials taken out of the RCA building is in this room. And the opening is tomorrow, so I'm still, like there's a big anthropomorphic chunk of cheese that's going to go in the middle there. I haven't hung them up yet. There's a few other things I haven't finished. I'm still, if I had another week, I'd probably get a week more worth of junk in here. So it's probably good to have a limit. And I will say, as we go in here, you'll see a lot of interesting objects. Everything is found. So what I'm interested in is almost curating the things that are wasted, giving them a new life, seeing them as potentially beautiful objects, and also playing with the ideas of what will our artifacts be? What will our ruins be? How will people interpret us? So that's what I'm going to say before we walk in this room. So there's a few things I like about this installation so far. One of them is that it smells. It smells like the off-gassing of styrofoam and probably different kinds of mold and debris that were in the Savannah building. Right. So the intention is to get you sick. No, the intention is that, to me, this is our junk. This is us. This is our future artifacts. All these things on the wall, which, to be honest, if I didn't tell you that I didn't make those, you probably would come in here and think, not only I made them, but you'd want to know how I made them. And to me, that's an interesting thing to play with, because there are artists out there who make work that looks like these plastic objects on the wall. But a lot of times I'm really impressed by what nature can do. I'm impressed by like what nature can do versus what we can do. So trying to collaborate with decay, collaborate with the natural cycles, the way things change, the way the elements are artists. And then, yeah, making this kind of room which I feel like, I don't know, maybe it's hard to place what the hell you're looking at, or why someone would make it, or where it came from, or what it is. I say this a lot, but if I can create a scenario where people say, what the fuck, then I'm happy. So this was pallets, like cardboard bins on pallets full of plastics that were supposed to be recycled. It's like extrusions. No, the walls.
Well, they were. So
Yeah.
They were just bins full of later.
And so once the building, it's a kind of a general cycle, a building is left abandoned, people start breaking in and fucking shit up, and one of the things they might try and do is burn everything. So the giant mountain of styrofoam, well, let's try and burn that. And whatever fires were started in there spread to certain areas, and in some cases got hotter than other cases. So you can actually see the transitions here between maybe this material, but if it was just hot enough, it might turn into that. Or that, which to me, like, look at that thing. It's like a crazy wad of viscous bubble gum, you know? Or this is like, there's so many things here that look visceral to me. They look like entrails. This is alien entrails. Or some kind of strange bottom of the ocean, you know, sea anemone discoveries. Like, oh, we found this new jellyfish, and it's right behind you on that wall over there. I really like playing with that kind of stuff. So, and I know that I'm not going to always be here. Like, we're here talking right now, but generally people are going to come in here, and I'm not going to be explaining all that to them. So what I'm often intrigued by is how people interpret things without me telling them something. Like I said, I often build stuff on site. So if I wasn't doing this exhibition in this space, I might have made this kind of strange, craggy iceberg mountain out of foam in the building, right where I found it. And then somebody traipsing through the Savannah building, maybe doing graffiti, maybe scrapping metal, would come across it, and they'd have the, whoa, what the hell is this moment? So I like playing with that, and I don't have a lot of time left here, but there's a chance I would say there's a really good chance I might still do something off-site as well. One of the things you don't see in here is that I found a bunch of scrap fragments of fast food and gas station signage. So it was like broken chunks of plastic that was to be recycled, but I liked a lot of them, but I got particularly geeked about all the fragments of the McDonald's signs, like the big golden arches. So I just took all of them. And I've been really playing with the idea of putting up a giant McDonald's sign somewhere. I just haven't done it yet, and this is the priority, but I think I could do it pretty quickly, and I really want to do it. So that might happen. Keep your eyes peeled for that. A lot of the work gets destroyed, all of it gets destroyed when I work on site, and this will be destroyed. I think the intention, it might be difficult to do, but I think that I would love to try and, in the end, recycle this, because that's what was supposed to happen, and it just didn't happen. So it'd be nice to do that as opposed to just taking it and putting it back in the RCA building. I photograph the crap out of places. If I do a project on site, usually the only thing that survives is the photo series. And then I'll often try and sell the photos to get by. There's a really great story about Christo, the artist Christo, who will wrap things. He's famous for wrapping things. That he'll propose these projects that nobody wants to fund. Nobody wants to fund a project where he wraps an entire island or something. So what he would do is he would do these immaculate drawings of them. This is what I want to do, amazing draftsman quality drawings of them, and he'd sell them. And all of those drawings he'd make of proposals that no one would fund, he'd sell them, and with the money he got from them, he'd do it himself. So I kind of like that principle. I like the idea of nobody's paying me to build a garbage mountain in an abandoned building. But if I can make photos of it and sell them, then I can kind of self-fund it. I also, I've kind of started to make a lot of videos documenting the process. So in this small room here, there's 4 videos that are going to just loop. And one of them is me, just kind of documents my process of gathering stuff at the RCA building and other aspects of it. I think a misconception about abandoned buildings is that somehow, if you were to watch like a crime drama on television, you get the feeling that inside abandoned buildings there's always some kind of bodies being dumped or satanic worship or illicit drug deals or gang. There's always some kind of crime. The truth is, it's often extremely quiet, desolate, the sounds of nature. So in Detroit, for me, the places I'd find that were the closest I could get to nature were the abandoned buildings. You could hear...
There's no power.
Well, there's no people.
No people.
There's nothing. There's nature coming back in. There's water getting through. There's stalagmites forming. There's moss on the floor where the carpet was. There's birds living in there. There's dogs living in there. It reverts back to nature in a way that there's something peaceful about it, but it's kind of similar to if you're in the woods. What do you have to do when you're in the woods? Well, you got to watch out for hitting your head on a branch as you walk through, or you don't want to get bit by a spider, right? Don't want to fall into a hole or off a cliff. There's a lot of similar things you just have to be aware of, but it's not, I don't think it's as sinister as people imagine. I think a lot of people wonder how dangerous it is. They always want to know, how dangerous is it what you do? Well, okay, every now and then you can run into people who might be potentially dangerous people, but you can probably run into them anywhere, pretty much everywhere. In a lot of cases, the people I run into are probably just like me doing something illegal. So either they're living in there, or they're scrapping, or they're doing graffiti, or they're just breaking stuff. So we're kind of kindred spirits. We do our own thing, and we just kind of nod all right, you do that thing, and I'll do that thing.
Have you been arrested before that?
Not for this. So this building on the right is Michigan and LaSalle. And from my understanding, this is all, I'm no expert. It's all research I've done since I've been here and people telling me stories. But apparently, from the research I did, this is the oldest part of the building. And they tore down the whole section on the other side of the tracks near Sherman. But this section that's still standing off LaSalle is not only the older part, but it's the section where they were pressing records.
Cool.
And I was reading blogs and people who used to work there telling stories, so there's only so much I know whether or not it's really true based on that, but it did seem pretty interesting that this was a very old part of the building. I had to feel it out for sure, we went there in January, and we had no trouble. But then when we came back this time, we weren't even sure if it was still standing. And then we got there, and it had clearly been more boarded up since last time. So you had to enter a different way. You start off a lot more careful. Like I'd park way down the street, I'd hoof it in. But there was one particular day that was really interesting where there was a whole crew of guys in there doing soil samples. They had a machine they had driven in. They were drilling down to check, boring to check the soil, and they must have done about 20 or 30 holes in the building. And it was so loud, and they had driven right up inside. And I walked in and talked to the foreman, and he seemed super cool. And then I thought, well, shit, I'm just going to drive in here too. So I drove in, and I did my own thing while they were doing their own thing. Not only was he super cool, but we talked a lot more. He told me that he's pretty sure in the basement section of this building that there might be some super old like computers from the RCA time. So I still want to go down there and check and find that. Everybody's been pretty chatty. A couple homeless people I met in there were perfectly friendly. But yeah, all that being said, I still generally like to be pretty quiet. I don't like to come in and just rip shit apart. I like to kind of come in and, you know what makes the most noise is when I have to like tip over a piece of styrofoam that's covered in glass. So if you're listening to this video, you'll hear a couple really loud parts where it's glass. It sounds like raining glass. I did get a spider bite. I panicked a bit because I felt like something had gone down in my shoe, like I had like a stick in my shoe. You know, I'm lifting up these things which have been sitting there for probably a decade, and there's spiders under there, and I brushed the spiders off. I brushed everything off. But I felt like I had something in my shoe, and then I eventually set something down, and I went to get it out, and I saw this like bulbous, gray, it looked like an engorged tick. And I like instinctively just flung it off, right? And then my brain started thinking, wait, that couldn't have been a tick. How could that be a tick? Oh shit, that was a spider butt. So I looked, and I had a couple of bites, and it did hurt. It felt a bit like a bee sting. The barn boat project, which is on the left, was really crazy. I took down an 1890s barn. I was asked to do a project with an 1890s barn that was decaying. So I took it down and started to rebuild it like this kind of boat shape, which of course everybody immediately was like, oh, you're like Noah making the ark. And so I kind of like playing with mythology and creation myth and destruction myth. I'm really open to interpretation, but the physical toll that this project took on me was pretty intense. I lost feeling in both of my arms at one point. I had got this thing called thoracic outlet syndrome, where if you're just lifting things too much, that you pinch these nerves that go down through your clavicle, and then your arms feel like you hit your funny bone all the time. And eventually I just couldn't work anymore. I couldn't do anything. So for about a month I was screwed, but I got the project done. It's in northern Michigan. It's about 2 hours north of, it's what they call the thumb of Michigan. So the top of the thumb is an area called Port Austin. It's all farmland. Those are all sugar beets. And it took me about 3 months. It will decay, just like the barn. It's the same materials. So you got a decaying barn, and I reused all those decaying boards, but it theoretically should stay. It's just that it's quite windy there. If me yelling at the camera a second ago didn't tell you enough. So there's a chance it could start to become the leaning tower with all the wind. But in both cases, like these videos are around 15 minutes to 20 minutes each. I think the one in RCA is longer, but you get a sense of how much time it takes me, like just to carry these freaking foam chunks from the pile to the car, back in. Yeah, it can take a long time. But I really like spending time in these places. It's very meditative for me. I get a lot of thinking done. I get a lot of, I don't know.
How do you decide where to go and do this stuff?
It all depends. I mean, if I would have come here without knowing anyone, I would have probably just explored until I saw something. But I was really helped out by Chate and Kip. But you know, even then, I still have to feel like the building inspires me, the history inspires me, the material inspires me. I still have to have ideas. You can't quite see it in this image, but in the foreground, in the darkness in the foreground, you can't even see it, but I had to start digging through, and that's where I found most of these plastic things on the wall. They're all kind of hidden in this debris here. And just by pulling things apart and digging, I started to find more and more interesting shapes and objects. That's pretty sure that's where the spider killed me. I do think that I'm interested in I'm interested in alchemy. I'm interested in ancient ideas. I'm interested in the elements. So the way the elements decay things, and that includes fire, water, wind, all the different. I'm often dealing with the elements when I do projects. So the barn project, I was completely affected by wind. I had to make the shape of the barn altered because of the wind. And like Chate said, the default to everything up there was, well, we can burn it. So we have just all these things where I'd pile up debris, and then the farmer who owns the barn, he has no legs from the knees down. And he would always say, well, I think you have to pour the gasoline and light the fire because I can't really run away if something goes wrong. So he would always get a kick out of that he'd like sit back and watch me as I potentially blew myself up. He thought that was hilarious. At some point in the barn project, somebody dumped 4 kittens on the site. So I was working, and one day all these cats showed up. So suddenly it becomes like YouTube cat videos. Just a lot of footage of cats. They were really great, though, because I'd be up there alone a lot, and suddenly these little cats came along. It was like nice company. When you're an artist, people compare you to other artists. It's always going to happen. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's certain names I always hear in relation to me. And one of them is Andy Goldsworthy. Andy Goldsworthy's famous for his coffee table books that show him stacking stones and leaves in the forest. He's out there alone. Or Gordon Matta Clark, famous for doing architectural interventions. He'd cut a big hole in a house or a building or something. He was in there alone. So I think that there's an element of, in some cases, I need help. But in other cases, in most cases, I really like the alone time. I like, even here, I get some of my best work done in the gallery in the middle of the night when nobody's here, because I feel like I can focus better. Maybe I'm too affected by people. I get like a sponge type effect, but I do like the quietude of being alone. Like I said, if I'm out, here's a sequence where it's quiet, very quiet in both videos. I like the sounds of nature. So, the barn project, for about 3 months, out of the 3 months, I had about 2 weeks of help. Not consecutive, but if you add up all the time, I had somebody help me. And during those times, it was super useful and helpful. And there were probably days when I wish I had help and I didn't. But I think there's something like Sisyphean about my methods. I'm like rolling the damn ball up the mountain myself every time, only to have it roll down again. So I think there's a kind of a theme that the way I work, by its nature, I might have to be alone a lot.
Was it Kip helping you?
Kip came one day, but not for long actually.
He probably collected more stuff than he helped.
That's really awesome.
That's not true. Oh, come on.
Kip, how much time did you spend collecting books for yourself?
10 minutes.
I'm going to say maybe we were both. So this is how it happened. Brent and I were in there gathering foam, and by the time Kip got there, we had pretty much finished with the foam, right? So
Don't throw me under the bus.
I'm not, but I'm just saying that there wasn't a whole lot of gathering to do when Kip got there. So he helped me get these weird plaster plaster foot molds, very strange. And I don't know, you spent at least a half hour on that. That was a long time you spent selecting feet, right?
Yeah.
And
Told me to be picky.
and then, but at some point, Kip did find these like pallets of old books, and then we kind of started to like pick our corner of the pallet to dig through, and then covet each other's books. That probably lasted for 20 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Like, oh, what did you find? Ooh, I kind of like that one. That kind of. You did take more. You did take more books than me. You definitely did.
Yeah.
But you were. I wasn't. I was a little more picky, I think. Yeah, I like nature. One of the things I've been doing while I've been here, which is kind of funny because it doesn't really necessarily feed into the project, but I do like to walk down to the creek behind here, and I'm like an old man. Like I bird watch. If I'm walking along and I see like a hawk, I stop and I want, oh, looks like a red tail. You know, I get really into animals. So I've been really excited since I've been here because there's been a lot of wildlife activity down by the creek. This is at the RCA building. This is a weird kind of pond scum retention tank underneath something. I really don't know what it was for. It's almost like a cooling tower,
Yeah, it is a cooling.
but I'm not sure what they were doing with it. This is the night I was in there working and I was listening to Black Sabbath all night long. So you can't hear it, but there's a tiny, tiny bit of Black Sabbath in that clip. Oh. And then it loops, and this is Detroit now. This is a project I did in an abandoned train station in Detroit. And this is a project in a neighborhood that's been completely cut off and is desolate. All the streets have been blocked off with concrete barricades, and a lot of trash is dumped, and I just walked through it and observed it. In this video,
Terminal building, that great big
yep,
building?
yeah, and on the 8th floor, I built a big kind of stone egg sculpture out of marble.
We were afraid to go in.
Oh, were you?
There, we're afraid to go in.
Well, you can't get in there anymore. They've actually done a pretty good job of cleaning it up. But in the old days, you could drive a car in there.
How many years ago was that?
This project was 2011, 2012. But the first time I went in there was in the 90s, and you could drive a car right in. But literally, the same time I was doing this project, they started to clean out all the asbestos, and that's halfway done.
Oh, that's cool.
And
It's like an upside down head.
yeah. And eventually, when they got to my floor, they cleaned out the sculpture as well, because when they clean out asbestos, they have to clean out everything. It's kind of, the dust is on everything, you know?
Oh, there you go.
This is right before I jump. I'm just realizing I have these little guys in almost every video.
Yeah.
I find these little wiggly worms. Yeah, well, they put all new windows in it. It's a little bit sad because they're clearly not historically accurate. They're like, I don't know. It just feels like if you're going to do it, couldn't you have done it just a little bit more accurate? And they're supposedly replacing the roof. They've cleaned out the inside. They just have to, what's next, I'm not sure.
All the windows were out of it.
Yes, you can see right through it like a big skeleton. I'm just not sure what their end goal is going to be. It's still vacant.
Housing.
Really good.
Thanks.
Really
Thank
good
you.
work.
Thank you.
Really.
Oh, thanks.